start with an apology, which you're never supposed to do, but I have had a very sad week. We lost our dog this week, and he was the best dog in the whole world. I don't have to tell you that. And as a result, I was unable to concentrate on anything, and I have not read over this material, and I should have several million times, so I'm going to have to read it to you. So you're going to have to forgive me. But I also have a PowerPoint presentation that I will soon, maybe even tomorrow, make available on whatever website it's supposed to be on, so you don't have to take too many notes. Nevertheless, I want you to hang on my every word. And I hope you can hear me, because my voice doesn't carry very much, especially if I'm crying all the time. I also want to discuss the conservation of weight within the family. As my friend Grace has lost 100 pounds or something. 40 pounds. Just lost 40 pounds. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's fine to be whatever size we are. Go for it, my people. Okay. So, here I go. You guys know more about the Common Core than I do. But it has become clear to me that I know now more about writing fiction than maybe you do. And so I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to sort of collaborate, and you should feel free to interrupt me because I'm very easy to interrupt. And if you have any questions, raise your hand or just shout out. And then we are going to decide what really matters to us. And I struggled as I got ready to do this over what was really most helpful. And because I am more of a writer now than an educator, thank God. The thing I do best now is talk about writing. So let's start there. Here is. How do we get to the next slide again? We pushed that. Here is my office. So this is the writer's perspective. And when I do school visits, I always start with this, and then I move on to the rest of the house. And by the time we're done, they're absolutely horrified, those poor children. And I offered to bring them on a field trip to clean up the house, and they are willing to come. But have they shown up? No. So this is actually from a few years ago, because I no longer have that laptop, but this is where I work, and this is what it looks like to be a writer. Whoa. Piles of stuff everywhere. Piles of research materials and vitamin pills, which are necessary, and cut and pasting with scissors even now, and research books and water. And this little area right here is where my beleaguered husband Bob gets to live his life. He doesn't get, and people who have been to my house can vouch for this. But here's the thing. I am a living example of finally following your bliss late in life. And it took me, this is something I've wanted to do my entire life, and I finally got to do it. And you guys, the reason I'm telling you this is because you cannot give up what you care about. And no matter what happens with the Common Core, you have to fight the good fight for books and for reading quality materials. It's going to be a hard fight because the textbook manufacturers and the people who are behind all this stuff are going to try to make money off the system by selling prepared materials. And you're going to have to fight it all the way. And that's why I'm here today, is to show you the best things about nonfiction and my passion for trade books and what they offer and how they fit in with the Common Core. So, to the barricades once again. There are things about the Common Core that I think are excellent. I do not dislike this. What I dislike is what's going to happen the rest of the way down the road, probably. Maybe not, who knows? I don't know, what do you think? Any thoughts about this so far?
I would love to see some other name than Pearson attached to anything. That's the thing that I find really concerning, that it seems to be one company.
Yeah.
I love more space for creativity. You can't be a genius without creativity.
That's true. Well, yes, you can. But you can be creative without being a genius.
No, but you can't have any forward motion as a society without any creativity.
Right. So just, keep an eye on the prize here, as we say. So I'm going to talk about some of what I and most nonfiction writers do, and I've got a little list. And as we go through this, I'm going to connect each point to the Common Core standards for grade 2, because I figured it was right in the middle, sort of K4. In fact, it is in the middle of K4. And as you know, they link back and ahead, so whatever I point out goes back and goes forward. And then we're going to look at evaluating nonfiction if we have time. I have no idea how much time this presentation is going to take because I couldn't time it because you're here and, So in other words, what can you do with students to discuss, analyze, and evaluate what I, as a stand-in for all writers, have done? And using excellent nonfiction, how can you link it to the Common Core? And as I need to tell you that though I have brought a few books, and only one dog book, I'm sorry to say, hard week, it was hard to really narrow these choices down because there is so much good nonfiction being published, especially in the picture book range. It's really, it's in a really exciting time in nonfiction. And that's the best part of the Common Core as far as I'm concerned, that it will bring publishers more and more into the fold of looking for what's out there, what's new and different, what can it bring to kids, all that stuff. So I am a very inquisitive person. I never stop asking questions. I have very few friends left. They find me intrusive. I don't understand why. When I came by this honestly, when my mother first met my husband, Bob, I was already old. We were already, I was like the oldest bride in history. But she met him after he had separated from his wife for a year. And we walked into my cousin's apartment where my mother was, and the first thing she said to him, this is not a joke, this is true, is, what's your divorce settlement? It was a Sunday morning. I met her in New York City. She lived in Washington, but I met her in New York. And I took the book review of the New York Times and went into the bathroom and locked the door. And I came out when Bob said, all clear. And I knew I could marry him because he did it. He did it, like he got through it. He got through it. She never even knew his name. She called him until she died, she called him son-in-law, so she wouldn't make a mistake. But anyway, I come by this, it's genetic. So I ask a lot of questions, and I figure people don't have to answer. They can always say no, but Bob never knew that. It took him a long time, and a lot of people don't know it. But then I have this one friend who won't even tell me what time it is. So anyway, I'm very curious. I'm curious about a lot of things, and I just love to find stuff out. I really do. I was a history major, not for the best reasons. I fell in love with I didn't fall in love with. There was nothing. But one of my history teachers.
Oh, yeah, sure.
One of my history teachers in college was so brilliant that I said, if I get an A in this class, I'm going to major in history. And I did, and I majored in history, but I didn't even know then. I didn't even understand what I was missing, And now I do, because we didn't learn history the right way when I was a kid. We learned it as a series of battles, and that's not what history is. And so I have become utterly obsessed with doing research, but we'll get to that later. And there's hardly anything that I find out that I don't want to know more about. So it was Ballet of the Elephants that propelled me here, my first nonfiction picture book. And I literally was flossing my teeth one night because the doctor said the word surgery, and I started flossing like full time. I had to retire. I had to leave the Department of Education so I could floss. And I was flossing, and there was this thing on TV that said it was a thing of, it takes a long time to floss your teeth if you want to avoid surgery. And it was about George Balanchine, and it was made in 1984, but I saw it in 2005, 4, 3, something, and 5. And it said, he also choreographed a ballet for elephants. And I said, what? And the next morning, I just went to work. I did nothing else for 6 months. I just thought, this is so bizarre. So that's what started me on this path, and it was pure chance. And then I had to learn everything about writing nonfiction. I had to learn what to tell, what to leave out, how to organize material, how to best tell it, how to keep track of research so that you don't lose the quotes you need and the material you need, how to dig more deeply than I ever had before, how to convey information, and then how to do it all for kids. So it was a steep learning curve, but boy, it was a blast. I just loved writing that book. It was so much fun. And one of the highlights was that I actually I hate to leave my house, and really this is the first time I've actually put on like normal clothes in, a year. And these are not, they're borderline. But I actually went down to New York and went to the Lincoln Center Library of the Performing Arts, which is a hoot, because you have to get a special permission thing. Has anybody been there? and you have to wear white gloves, and you go into this room and they let you take nothing with you. They lock up everything. You can't even take a piece of paper. And then you sit down at this table and they give you one white sheet of paper and one pencil, and there's a guard sitting in front of you, even though you're the only person there, and they hand you the material. So that was really cool. That's like just the way you do your jobs, I'm sure.
White glove.
So, the white gloves, I like the white gloves. So, narrative nonfiction is in fact what I know best, telling a story. But there are a lot of other types, and people are developing new things, new categories all the time. Do they matter? It may help you think about what you're doing with young children. So, here's some categories. 1, a survey is an overview of a topic, like the old DK books. You all know what they were like, Beatles, pages and pages of Beatles. No further information, no backup, they were important. A concept book, abstract ideas or classifications, like Green, which I'll get to later, by Laura Vaccaro-Seeger, which is really about the concept of green. If I keep moving, will you lose me so that you'll never be, shoot. A specialized sort of book like what Steve Jenkins does, where he picks one topic and compares like tails and heads and eyes. And how-to, a process and a procedure book. And I actually wrote one of these without realizing that that's what I was doing, and then I realized that that is what I was doing, which is feeding the sheep, which is basically the process of making a sweater from the sheep to wool to through the whole thing. But it's in the guise of a story, because I thought I was telling a story. And then I realized it was a process book. And there is a dog. I didn't put the dog in. And narrative nonfiction, which is just about everything else. Biography, memoir, events, the whole thing. And really you don't, okay, you can write it down. Write it down. Why not? Okay. And then there are other categories that Mark Aronson is now coming up with. Do any of you know about Mark Aronson? Is he somebody, how many do know? Quite a few of you. So he's really he's in the vanguard of the Common Core. He is out there. And he is developing new categories. He's very excited. And he says, here are some. Data, which you might just call fast facts, like the almanac. Expository, which you might call facts plus, because the facts are interwoven into content area. Narrative, which is like what I just showed you of feeding the sheep. And then he's taken these new categories, disciplinary thinking. And these are really interesting to me. And you can read this, so I don't need to read it to you, do I? No, I don't. Inquiry, interpretation, and action, like the Scientists in the Field books. So any questions about these? All clear so far? We have no major issues at this point? We have a question.
Well, I want it, and I know you're going fast, so I'm just wondering if you're going to be able to post this.
I will post all of this somewhere.
Thank you.
Yes.
So,
It would be your job to find it.
If we know where that is.
I will use an alias, which you will have to find. Okay?
This is a serious question, but it's going to sound sarcastic. On the previous slide, you said there were 2 categories, but then there were like 8.
This is categories
We're in
1,
category 1, okay.
categories
Thank you
2.
for clarifying that.
I don't even actually understand that.
The first one was just one system of categorizing things.
Oh.
This is a second system of categorizing things.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And this is a third system of categorizing things, and this is the system the Common Core is using. Expository, persuasive, procedural, and narrative.
Right.
So it's just recategorizing.
It's just different ways of looking at nonfiction. And I do find it helps to pick up a book and say, what kind of book is this? Let's start there. What kind of book is this? We used to start by saying, what does the cover tell us? But now we're sort of, what kind of a book is this? What can I tell from the cover? Okay, so we're past the categories. We are moving right along. Whatever the topic, even if it's one of, even if it's expository or whatever, the writer probably asks the same questions. The writer probably asks who, what, when, where, why, and how. I spend an incredible amount of time asking myself how to word a sentence. It is literally true that I have worked on one sentence for hours and hours. And then, of course, if you change one sentence, you have to change all the rest of the sentences because you've repeated a word somewhere, or it's the, whatever. So this is not every question that a writer asks herself, but this is a start when you're doing nonfiction. And it links right to the Common Core. Ask and answer such questions as who, what, when, where, when, why, and how to demonstrate understandings of key details in a text. So far, we're right on target. The Common Core and I are as one. We are like this. And we really do ask ourselves these questions. It's not just, sooner or later, I don't ask them chronologically as I go. I don't ask them all at once. But I'll come back after, like writing a whole book, and I'll say, well, I sort of didn't look at motivation. Why did they do this? Can I find that out? It's hard to find out. You may have to read somebody's autobiography to find out what led them to do something odd, but So, and I always ask when and where, and if you can't find out when something took place, so anyway, it's pretty obvious. Obvious, yes? Okay. But there are other questions. And this is really the basic place where I start everything I do. Why do I want to tell this story? Where is my passion? And I have to say that word is noticeably missing from the Common Core. I did a word search, and there's nothing about it. So, I read an interview a long time ago with somebody who was writing somebody else's biography and was spending years with this person, and about halfway through realized that he hated the person he was writing about and couldn't finish the book. So, you're going to spend a lot of time with this material. So where is my passion for it? Where's it coming from? Is it, I found out that Balanchine's politics weren't exactly what I would have wanted. But I could just sort of slide over that because that's not really what I was writing about. I was writing about an event. So, where's the passion? That's where I start. And what you, of course, want is for your children to have passion. And it's too bad it's not in there.
Well, they do talk a lot about the writer's purpose, though.
Yeah, purpose is not the same thing. No, your purpose is not, if you could say my purpose is to convey my passion, but, it's stretching it a little bit. And I don't think you always know what a writer's purpose is. And never mind, we'll run out of time if I go into that story. But if you as a reader don't sense that passion, I'm not sure the writer has done her job. Because if it's just bland prose. So look for the passion. Look for why the writer wrote the book, if you possibly can. This book, which Grace kindly lent me, Picture a Tree. It's new. You haven't probably seen it yet. It's the wonderful Barbara Reed who does her plasticine art. And she starts by saying there's more than one way to picture a tree. And these are all figures done in plasticine. And this book is all about, really, her passion for trees. It comes through every single page, and her joy and her delight in what trees are, what they are for children, how they enter the imaginative world of the child, how it can be a pirate ship, a clubhouse, a friend. Some trees are sun umbrellas on the hot walk home. So it's a concept book about trees, but it is filled with passion and beauty. And at the end, it's just, at the end, it's not at the end, it's before the end. When it's Halloween, when a tree glow in the darkness, or skeletons, some trees put on snowsuits. Picture a tree, what do you see? So it invites the reader in, and I think it's a brilliant work, and it's all from her passion, you can tell. Okay, then I ask, oh look, a slide. Isn't that wonderful? It's a slide. Then I will often ask myself, and not necessarily in the beginning, but at some point I ask myself, what point of view am I going to use to tell this story? And indeed, there it is in the Common Core. Assess how point of view or purpose shapes the content and style of a text. Most books that a writer writes, most nonfiction books will be in third person or omniscient, the omniscient storytelling voice. And you don't, one of the things that I learned as a writer, which was interesting and something I hadn't really thought about, was the difference between the author and the narrator of the book. So don't assume that you're reading the author. You are reading a narrator. And that narrator often takes an objective, godlike view of the material and stands back and just tells you everything. But there are some books in which the narrator, in nonfiction, in which the narrator uses first person. And it's unusual. So piano starts here, The Young Art Tatum by Robert Andrew Parker starts on, this is the house in Toledo where I was born. And he assumes the persona of Art Tatum to tell the story. This is my father, he is a mechanic. This is my mother, she often sings in the church down the street, but she isn't singing here. She has too much cleaning to do. There aren't a lot of these, but I think it would be really interesting to develop a unit with kids on first-person nonfiction and compare it to third-person and say, what do we know, how limited is it to choose the first person, and how much broader is it to choose the third, or vice versa. And I always think of point of view as a camera, and in first person the camera is inside your head. In second person, when you're addressing you, which we'll get to in an example, and in third person, the camera's moving out. So in close third person, the camera's on your shoulder, and in omniscient, the camera is just out there somewhere. So everybody knows that, right? Yes? No?
Well,
Be brave.
not.
Maybe not. Okay, so.
I mean, if you're into photography and you think of it that way, you would know that. But
Yeah.
because that's how they talk about point of view
Right,
in photography.
right, mhm.
And when you're taking photos, so.
Right.
Well,
So-
also omniscient can be inside the minds of the other characters.
Yes, it can.
Like
Omniscient-
far away.
Omniscient can go anywhere. Omniscient is the godlike view. You can go inside, you can go outside. But third, close person third means that your narrator, and you don't usually find this in nonfiction, that the narrator knows nothing that that person doesn't know. So, yeah, it's complicated. I have talked about point of view for hours in my new life as a writer.
Leda, who wrote that?
Who wrote what? Oh, Robert Andrew Parker.
Yeah.
There are those second-person books also, like the Faith McNulty book, If You Decide to Go to the Moon, you know that book? Which is addressing you. And those are really interesting experiences for kids to have, to see the different ways of telling a story. Because you have to decide every time you sit down, what is the best way to tell this story? Then I asked myself, what do I need to learn? What kind of research will I need to do? Is there enough material? I've had a lot of ideas where there's just nothing I can find out, and it's too obscure, and I'm going to spend too much time having to travel somewhere. How can I narrow or broaden my subject, and what am I really interested in? What is it about the story I want to tell that moves me? So there's one story, there's only one nut museum in the world. You may not know this. It was in Connecticut. It was a museum of nuts. And the woman who ran it, single-handedly, who died a few years ago, collected nuts from all over the world. And I wanted to write about her. I wanted to write about the Nut Museum, and I still might someday, because I thought it was such a great story. She was interviewed on, one of those Sunday morning sort of shows, so I can actually find it. So, if I choose to do that, even though she's dead, I can find what I need to find out. So, the Common Core stuff is participate in research and writing projects, and recall information from experience, or gather information from sources to answer a question. So, are we doing okay so far?
Yeah.
Is this helpful?
Yes.
Okay, good, we like that.
They said no.
Who said no?
So what if they had said no?
Well, I would just stop and we could just sing songs.
Kumbaya.
Yeah, kumbaya. I wouldn't be surprised if interviews reveal that many writers, including me, have a very hard time tearing ourselves away from nonfiction, from research. It is so much fun to do, and you can just do it forever. And writing is really hard work. Like, it's not as hard as being a miner or, but it's hard work because every day you sit down and you face your demons. And that's really what it's about, is sort of sitting there, and the amount of self-hatred that I can generate in one day, you just wouldn't believe. So, so research doesn't do that. Research is a hoot, and it's a lot of fun to follow trails and be a detective and, find that one piece. So it's hard to let go of. So at some point you have to make the transition to writing, and, it's not as much fun. But if you find exactly the right point that you have been looking for, and you didn't even know you were looking for it, it is such a wonderful thing. So when I was writing Ballet of the Elephants, for example, there was this one little part. Where is it? as Grace and I know from our long experiences together, they take things out of books in the night. So I read a lot about John Ringling North, and I knew, I had an idea of him. He had his own private railroad car, and he was a character, and he did this and he did that. But the thing that really allowed me to understand John Ringling North, and also helped me write the whole book, was this sentence. John Ringling North grew up in Wisconsin with 5 wild uncles who owned a circus. Johnny had wild ideas too. Once he even brought a pony up into the attic of an uncle's house. Huh? Like what kind of a character makes a pony go up the stairs for like what reason exactly? And I just had this sudden insight into this character. So I didn't even know I was looking for it, but it opened up a world for me. I also spent months looking at pictures of St. Petersburg, Russia, and videos of St. Petersburg, so I could feel as if I had grown up there or lived there, so that I had a sense of what these Russians were like who never gave up their love for their mother country. But learning stuff is only a prerequisite. You also have to figure out how to keep track of information, how to cite sources, and how best to tell the story. Oh, more research. I don't know why this is here. Oh yeah, because you can also tell if you can't find enough information about one person, you can do a group biography. So you can have kids work on, let's say they're interested in something. What are they interested in? They're interested in something and they can't find out everything, so they expand it and just into a larger category. So Julius Lester wrote a book called The Blues Singers, 10 Who Rocked the World, in which he only had to provide a little bit of information about each character. So that was just another option. And photo research is another whole story. The day I found this photo of the actual elephants on parade in their tutus, it was a happy day. So you also have to figure out how to tell the story. What parts of the story do I want to tell? You cannot tell the whole story of anything. You just can't. You have to select and make it into your story. So write narratives in which you recount a well-elaborated event or short sequence of events, including details to describe blah, 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 and provide a sense of closure. What's going to be your beginning, middle, and end of the larger story? So you all know the wonderful book Me, Jane, which was a wonderful book. So Jane Goodall has had a very long life with many things happening, and he chose to just tell a little piece of her childhood, the development of her curiosity and love. And at the very end of the book, when she falls asleep with her pet, to awake one day, he just then skipped a lot of years to her dream come true, which, who does not cry when they get to this part of the book? And indeed, he told what he needed to tell, and it worked so beautifully. So how do you select those pieces? And that's a whole, world in itself. And it connects to the Common Core. How nice of them. And how do you approach difficult parts? This is, oh look, a slide. Identify the main purpose. This follows directly from what we were just talking about. Identify the main purpose of a text, including what the author wants to answer, explain, or describe. So I'll talk about Monsieur Marceau now. I knew nothing about Monsieur Marceau when I started this book, except that he was a mime and I had seen him perform either on television or in real life. I don't know. I have no memory. I haven't had a memory since you last saw me. But really, I knew nothing about him. I did not know he was Jewish. I didn't know what his role in World War II was. I didn't know the parts of his life that were tragic. I had to decide what to tell. And then there was the part with the Nazis. Do you know this? Thank you. So, they evacuated the city of Strasbourg in like 4 hours, and they took a little with them, and he lost his entire family in the concentration camp, except his brother. I didn't know how I was going to tell that. So in one draft I took it out entirely. And then I said to my editor, who had already accepted the book, and actually he didn't change a word, but I changed words. And I said, I don't think we should put in the World War II part because it's a picture book. And he said, there's no story without the World War II part. And I said, okay, you're the publisher, you're the editor, let's go for it. And, you know, I've read it to 6-year-olds, and I've read it to 5-year-olds, and I've read it to 7-year-olds, and the 7-year-olds say, oh yeah, the Nazis, that was awful. And the 5-year-olds are just fine. You know, they don't care, they won't get it. I mean, if they don't, you know. And then I just skipped right over that and said later he joined the French underground in its efforts to resist the Nazis. And he led hundreds of Jewish children from an orphanage in France to safety in Switzerland. So I really got what I needed to. I got the core of what he did, which was so courageous, which made me so interested in him. So my purpose was to tell a little bit of his life, to tell him as a performer, and to tell what made him a performer. There's no mention of his family. There's no mention of his great artworks. There's no mention of the books he created. I didn't need to tell that part. So it's as much learning to leave out, what to leave out, and, you know, as it is what to put in. We might have a slide. Oh no, and then the tenses are always interesting. And again, that connects right to demonstrate command of the conventions of standard English grammar and usage when writing and speaking. And there's also some other stuff in the later grades about using tense. So again, with Marceau, in the beginning of the book, and this was completely unconscious, in the beginning of the book, I started with, look at this man. He climbs imaginary stairs, he bows to an invisible person. Tense? Present tense. His name is Marcel Marceau, and he is a mime. And then on the second page, who was this man who performed all over the world? And on the third page, I'm in past tense. And that was because I wanted to tell his story. So, you know, you can look at books for the places where tense changes, why the author decided to do that, what was the advantage or disadvantage. A lot of books are being told in present tense now. Does it work? Does it give you a sense of immediacy? Not all the time. Sometimes it seems awkward. So, you know, study tense and teach kids when to use what. Ha! There we are. Is that not the greatest cover? It is such a great cover. Sorry. A digression. Then I asked myself, what can the illustrator provide that I can't? Which is, you know, in a picture book, at least half the book, and they get paid a lot more, I'm telling you right now. The illustrators get all the money. So, and, you know, it ties right into Common Core. Use information gained from illustrations and the words to demonstrate an understanding of the text. Where, when, why, and how events occur. So, let's look at green. Ha! I'm in the flow now. I get that I have a slide for every book. So green is a concept book that just runs through different greens. Without the illustrations, there's hardly a book. I mean, pea green, you know, you don't have a book without the illustrations. But the illustrations also add a sense of mystery because of the die cuts. You know, what could be coming up? Well, there's no way of knowing. But once you've been through, it's fun to choose the aspects of the illustrations that have added to the text. So that's a concept book
Oh, it
that...
says khaki there in the box. Okay.
Yeah, it says khaki. Isn't that cool?
It is.
Hey, did anybody else ever notice that? How did
Turn
you do
down the
that?
page and see.
How did you do that?
Did
She
it
did
say
it with
something?
the grasses.
Oh, look at jungle green. Okay.
Oh, it says
See, this says jungle, and this, you would never see that it says khaki
Well, now I can.
until you frame it
Yeah.
in the die cut.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's a good day for Beth.
Red letter.
So, you know, what do the illustrations add? Pretty much everything. And then it's spring by the superstar team of Julie Fogliano and Aaron Stead, and don't forget Philip Stead. If you just read the text of the first page of this book, first you have brown, all around you brown. First, all around you have brown. You have no idea what this book is about. It could be one of those children who spreads his feces on the walls.
How many picture books have I read?
None. But really, it could be anything. You could be trapped inside a cardboard box. Who the heck knows? But in fact, this is a book about the coming of spring and waiting for the spring to come. And then there are seeds. Well, what are we talking about? Look, a child is planting seeds. So it's, you know, without the illustrations, the text is fairly meaningless. You might be able to figure something out, but it's fairly meaningless. So looking at what the illustrations add, it's always fun. Another example is Mysterious Thelonious. This is a work of genius. I don't know, it's probably out of print by now, and some of you might not remember it. But Chris Rashka took one of Thelonious Monk's songs, Mysterioso, and actually illustrated it with words, music, and color to represent the music in a book, which is almost impossible. And I got to see him present this as a long frieze, which is the way he was hoping to publish it once. God, he is so cute. I digress. And so the colors are supposed to represent the notes, and obviously this is where the notes are in the scale. So, this is what the illustrations can do for a book. And I have one more example of this, which is We March by Shane Evans. Because of my advanced years, I was actually on the March on Washington in 1963, and I found this book extremely moving. I think it's a beautiful book, We March. But the beginning of it is, the morning is quiet, the sun rises, and we prepare to march. Could be anything, could be anything. And it's only a couple of words per page, and we work together. Well, what are they working on? They're making protest signs. So the way in which art and text work together, in a picture book is just utterly miraculous and takes us into a whole new world that no other medium can do. I mean, this is why I love the picture book, and I'm very nervous about where we're going with the picture book. But yeah, so art and text. And it'd be fun to have kids work together on this and say, one of you write, and then one of you draw, and then reverse it, and see how many different stories can you get from the same words. How might I structure a story? I've totally lost where I am. There are unlimited options. Am I going to use chapters, sidebars, just words on the page? Am I going to go chronologically? Am I going to jump back and forth in time? Am I going to use backstory? What am I going to do? But I brought a couple of examples, and you can see the Common Core has used text features and search tools to locate information relevant and explain how specific images contribute to and clarify a text. Grace was over last night with Consolation, her dog, and a pizza, and I was unable to complete a single sentence. I'm really losing it. The words are all merging into one great word in the sky. So bear with me. So you all know Snowflake Bentley, which uses sidebars. When Jackie Martin wrote the text, that information was all in the text. And the designer of the book said, you have too much information in the text. How about if we pull it out and put all this other information into sidebars? So a lot of books, a lot of nonfiction books will do that. The sidebars work both for and against the book. They interrupt the flow of the story, but they also provide information that allows you to stay with the flow of the story. So it's a big decision for a writer and an editor and a publisher and an illustrator. In this case, I thought it worked beautifully. I was on the Caldecott committee. Of course I thought it worked beautifully. And it allowed Jackie to keep the lyrical text front and center, but it also provided you with the information you needed. So there are really unlimited ways these days, and of course now with the web, you can just have hyperlinks and you can do whatever you want to do. But it's got to work for the book. It has to work for the book and not against the book. I bet there's this picture of Snowflake Bentley. Oh, an island. I bet you guys know Jason Shin because he lives in Burlington. I haven't met him yet.
He's very cute.
Is he as cute as Chris Rashka?
Younger than Chris Rashka.
I like him old now. So in his nonfiction book about the Galapagos, he has used almost a graphic novel format, tiny little spot illustrations to present a lot of information. And he's been able to follow, because of the way that he structured the book, he's able to use the illustrations to show change much more effectively than he could have if it had been full-page art. So in this one series of pictures, The tortoise's shells change shape. Their shells become smaller and turn up in the front, and the saddleback shape is better for keeping cool and navigating the desert. Personally, they get weirder and weirder looking, but you know, turtles are bizarre. Turtles are just bizarre. So another way to structure information. And
That's a tortoise, that's right.
what? A tortoise?
Yeah, maybe.
It wasn't a vertical.
Tortoise. I have a Scottish friend who always says tortoise. So now I say tortoise. Okay, so how can I keep the research from showing or from taking over? There's a line for all of us writers that says you do all the research and then you forget it and write the book. Because otherwise you're just going to be thinking and going back and forth and all the rest of it. But go for the essential stuff that you remember. In my case, it's like 2 words. But many people are able to remember what they've been doing. So, and indeed it fits with the Common Core, how and why an individual's events or ideas develop and interact over the course of a text. I connected those two because I did. That's why. It made sense to me at the time. And the book is, essentially my idea of how to keep the research from showing or taking over is what I said earlier, keep your eye on the prize. What information do I absolutely need to tell the story here? The story is preeminent. And the story has to have a beginning and a middle and an end, even if it takes place over an hour. It has to have, if it's narrative nonfiction. So what do I leave out that just gets in the way of telling that story? So Balto, The Incredible Life Thereof, this is a wonderful book about, you know, the start of the Iditarod and all that. And I think she did a fantastic job of integrating a lot of research and then leaving it out and concentrating on Balto. And then at the end, goodness, there's a lot of information. She talks about the detective work she had to do, the places she visited, what kind of activities you can do, her bibliography. But a lot of this is really what she needed to find out and not find out, and what she could leave behind and what she needed to integrate. And it's kind of a model for that. And she also has a website with more information about this. So it works for how to tell the story you really want to tell. How are we doing? Questions? Any questions? I realize some of you just had lunch. I see that look in the eyes, that glazed, sandwichy look.
So Leda, I actually have a question.
Oh, good.
So it's interesting now with so many more technologies and with ebooks and with more interactive formats that there might, do you think there's any, what's the word, more of a pull to include that in a supplemental format?
I hope it stays in the book for
Yeah.
many reasons. You know, once you have to leave the book and go to another source, you're leaving the book. And, you know, I mean, a long time ago, when Lincoln, a photobiography, won the Newbery, I actually wrote a letter to School Library Journal, which got me in a lot of hot water, because you may know that there is not a single source note in that book. I don't want to go outside the book to find what kind of research the author used. I want to take the book and look at it and say he did his work, or she did her work. And if you have to go online, you know, it's just another. Now, as books migrate to ebooks, which I'll be dead, so, you know, I don't know what'll happen. I don't think anybody knows what'll happen, and I don't want to think about it because I'll be dead. It's too sad.
No, I do, I think it's interesting because I think that, right, there's this need for it to be expansive and now,
Yeah.
I think there's fewer people, or, I mean, I think in this room there's probably not, but there's a lot of people who are saying like, it must go beyond because now you can do so much more and there's.
Well, you can, and there's nothing to
apps, the book
stop
app
you.
and
Yeah.
everything like that, so.
And there's nothing to stop you, but, you know, it's interesting because for centuries, the 32-page book generally has been the picture book. There's nothing anymore to stop that from changing unless, I mean, there are reasons for it to continue that way in print because of the expense, but if they're going to go to apps and all books are going to be ebooks, there's no limiting the form anymore. And what does that mean for people who love form? You know, what does it mean when we have unlimited options? There's too much choice in the world. So, what about the importance of other characters? Again, this is like, how do you keep the story in mind? Who do you need? So as I said, I left out all of Marceau's family when I told Marcel Marceau's story because I didn't need it. It wasn't part of that particular story. And one of the common core things that I picked out was describe how characters respond to major events and challenges. And I thought that connected because that's all you need to know. You know, how do they respond? What is the main focus of this book? And then you decide what you leave out. It's all about leaving things out. Honestly. So, I don't have a particular book for this, do I? I had Marcel Marceau. Here's a really good question. Am I going to use dialogue? There's a huge debate about this. I don't know if any of you followed the debate about The Seibert Winner Bomb by Steve Sheinkin, which is a wonderful book. I have read it. I loved it. He kind of takes dialogue from different sources, which are well documented, and puts them together as conversation. Is that legitimate? Apparently the Seibert Committee thought it was okay. I have mixed feelings about it. But you know, nobody remembers conversations accurately anyway. I mean, I can leave here and say, oh yeah, she asked that, but it's not going to be what she actually asked. So how do you represent dialogue, and what does it add to a nonfiction book? So I found Ballet for Martha. Oh, and acknowledge differences in the point of view of characters, including by speaking in a different voice for each character when reading dialogue aloud. Recall information from experiences or gather information. I don't know why that's there. I was desperate. So, in Ballet for Martha, when Martha, what's her name? Thank you. Thank you. I need a team with me. And Aaron Copland, when they arrive for the dress rehearsal. When Aaron arrives, and by the way, this is in present tense, which is another interesting decision. When Aaron arrives for the dress rehearsal, he sees that the music he composed for one scene has been used to go with another. It doesn't bother me a bit, he says, especially when it works. What will you call the ballet, he asks. Appalachian Spring, says Martha. She found those words in a poem that has nothing to do with ballet, she admits, but she likes the sound of it. And there's other dialogue in here, too. At the end, there are notes. This is page 20. The title for the ballet, blah, blah, blah. The poem had nothing to do with Martha's dance, but she liked the sound of it. Copeland said he laughed when people told him they could hear the coming of spring. There's no actual source for that conversation. Did it really occur? Did she make it up from something that somebody told her? Did she? It's tricky. It's tricky, and I'm pretty strict about nonfiction. I would be reluctant to put in dialogue unless I had it documented as an actual conversation, even though people don't remember conversations. So, the whole question of fact and fiction, that's what I grappled with as a history major for many, many years, because if somebody walked into this room and did something odd and we all wrote about it, we'd all have a different version of whatever happened. So, you work on it with kids. Am I out of time? Almost.
Leda, didn't they talk about, the picture book format as biographies that, really, were they a real biography or were they, more,
Yeah.
fictionalized biography?
Well, then it should say so.
Because,
If it's fictionalized biography, it needs to tell you that, because things will be quoted forever as truth. There's a quote from Einstein about the Atlantic Telegraph cable that I happen to know for one reason, and he said, imagine a cat in England and the cat's tail in America, and it's a long tail, and somebody pushes on the cat in one end and the tail, somebody pushes on the tail in one end and the cat meows on the other. Now take out the tail and you have the Atlantic Telegraph cable. Well, I could find no source for that. It's apocryphal. No, he never really said it. Nobody knows that he really said it. So if I happen to write that book, I will not use it, So unless I wanted to say this is an apocryphal quote, So be clear, just be clear. You can do whatever you want as long as you know what you're doing. Is it really nonfiction? Are the illustrations authentic and accurate? Does it matter? So gather relevant information from multiple print and digital sources, assess the credibility and accuracy of each source, and integrate the information. I have this thing about the world's greatest elephant, which I think cannot possibly be true. And you know, the elephant in that book is Modoc, and the elephant in Ballet of the Elephants is Modoc, but it's not the same Modoc. I found that out through extensive research. But I don't believe that book. And he has never given a source for his story. There is nothing to support it. So is it fiction or nonfiction? In my mind, it's fiction. It would be fine if he said it's fiction, but he doesn't say that.
He just did the Red Clover Line.
I know, I haven't read it.
Okay, so you don't
I
know
don't
the
know.
same about
I have no opinions.
Oh, yes, she does.
This book, House Held Up by Trees, have you seen this book?
No.
It's a beautiful poem. It's illustrated by, are we sick of John Klassen yet? No, we love John Klassen.
Not at all.
But look at this. This is a poem about a house that becomes a derelict house, and the trees grow up all around it, and there's a crack of light, and you can see across the foundation. The trees lifted it, and maybe you will pass it today and tomorrow as it floats there above the ground like a tree house, a house in the trees. Trees do not grow like that. Trees do not grow up from the bottom. They grow up from the top. They cannot lift a house. So it's a nice poem because as poetry it's evocative. When you see it as an illustration, my thought is, goof, major goof. Where was the editor? They live in New York City. That's the problem. Sorry, I get a little maniacal about these things. And then, I think this is near the end. These are all related. These are the biggest questions of all. Where do I start the story? Where do I end the story? And how do I keep the middle alive? So, compare and contrast the most important points and key details presented in two texts of the same topic. Write narratives in which you recount a well-elaborated event or short sequence of events, including details to describe actions, thoughts, and feelings. So this really goes to the question of where do I start? Where do I end, and where do I keep the middle going? And this goes to how different people address this problem. So fortunately, we have two books that came out about Henry Knox and the Canons. And we can use them with students to compare the same story told in different formats by two outstanding writers. So Anita Silvey begins her book about Henry Knox by saying, when other boys walked, Henry Knox bounced. Where others saw problems, he found possibilities. In 1750, Henry was born into a working-class Boston family. And Don Brown begins his book, which is more focused on a single event rather than Henry Knox's entire life, by saying, the British Army held the city. They thumbed their noses at the surrounding hills where General George Washington and his soldiers stared down at them. Two completely different places to start, even though they're about the same thing. And then they ended Don Brown ends his, the Americans won back their city in a great victory. It was March 17, 1776. George Washington led a joyful parade into Boston. Beside him was Henry. And Anita ends hers by saying, as a bookseller, Henry insisted that the cannons of Fort Ticonderoga could be used to liberate Boston. As head of artillery for the Continental Army, he always believed that the Patriots would win. Henry, who saw possibilities where others saw problems, was right. So she's pulled it right back to the first sentence, brought it into a circular story about Henry himself, whereas Don Brown has talked about the specific event. Both are excellent books, and you can use them to say, where do you begin? What do you do in the middle? Where do you end? And there's a lot of other books on the same topic like this that I find really exciting to talk about, because it's everything that I do in my daily work. And this might be finally. How can I engage the reader in the story and keep it from being one damn thing after another? Is there cause and effect? What are the connections? You know, in the old days when I was a kid, which was before you were all alive, the nonfiction was just, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And now it's like, why did this happen? How did this happen? What made the person do whatever the person did? And a really good example, and so describe the relationship between a series of historical events, scientific ideas or concepts, steps in technical procedures, blah, 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 blah. So this new book, Brave Girl, which you can tell I stole the cover from Amazon, is all about Clara and the Shirtwaist Makers' strike of 1909. My grandmother actually worked in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory before the fire. So I feel a strong connection to this, and I wanted to see how she would handle this material. As the weeks grind by, Clara makes friends with the other faculty girls. At lunch, they share stories and secrets as if they were in school where they belong. Clara smolders with anger, not just for herself, but for all the factory girls, working like slaves. This was not the America she had imagined. The men at the factory tell her they've been trying to get the workers to team up in a union. Then they'd strike, refuse to work until the bosses treat them better. But the men don't think the ladies are tough enough. Not tough enough? Because they're girls? Oh, yes they are. Clara knows it. She'll show them. So we get an insight into her motivation, the cause and effect of her actions, the reason she does what she does, and in the next page we've got her out on strike. This is a great book. It's a wonderful book. And it works. Let me just see if I have another slide. Yeah, okay. Oops. I just want to say that this goes back to where we started with Fight the Good Fight. It's a great book for that. Then I asked myself several existential questions, and we're almost done. Is every single sentence as good as I can possibly make it? Does every single word earn its place? What about fresh language, active verbs, precise nouns, clarity, varied sentence structure? And, you know, that's where revision comes in. It's all revision. You get it down, and then you spend the rest of your life revising it. And am I the right person to tell this story? This brings up all the issues of multiculturalism and diversity and everything else, and if I want to write about a black person and what are the issues. And, you know, my advice on this is you write the story that you need to tell in your soul. You write it from your heart, and you do the best you can to be as authentic and as historically correct as you possibly can be. But you can't say, nobody can tell me what I can or cannot write. If I feel it, if I have that passion. I feel that so strongly. And I feel that writing is all about the imagination, and that, you know, if you cannot imagine yourself into the shoes of another person, you shouldn't be writing. So, yes, I'm the right person to tell the story if it's the story I want to tell. And I will end it there. We don't need to know that. And does anybody have any questions or comments? I hope so. Yes.
So, I wish I had the time to read a book, to figure out where it belongs, and then to write a note someplace so that when the teacher asks me 2 months later what book fits where, but I have no memory.
Well, you could put it right in the catalog. Right?
Well, I do, but then, but I don't have enough time to put it in the catalog for every single thing they're gonna be doing on the Common Core.
Well, I suggest
So, I
that
mean,
because you guys are all working in the same field with resources and whatnot, that you start a page together, do a wiki, and start like adding a book and saying how it connects to the core and what you've done with it. I mean, there's no reason. You have these resources and this knowledge at your fingertips.
And
help
book
each
lists-
other.
Book lists
And the
have been
book
doing
lists.
wonderful.
Yes.
And I've added those into my catalog under the Common Core, but,
Yeah.
I'll think of something and then I'll go to write it down, and then you know how it is, somebody asks you something, you put the book
Yeah.
down, you don't know what happened, what was the name of the book, what did it look like, I don't know.
You know,
Whenever they started in the Department of Ed.
Yeah, the
website.
B2.
Yeah, so I think people just aren't contributing, so the framework for that exists.
Well, see, that's,
I just say, you know, if I were still doing review sessions, God, thank you, I'm not doing review sessions, we would be doing this now with our books, I think. We'd be saying, you know, here's some ideas. But in the meantime,
Tell them about my.
Thank you,
Thank you
Leda.
so much.
live long and prosper. Grace and I are going to be doing a mock Caldecott this year together. As you may know, this is Grace's last year and a half at her job. Grace has not announced that yet. Forget that you heard that. If you were me, you would have forgotten it already. And we're going to do it together and talk about